I suppose at some point amidst the pandemic, we have to reach for what positives we can. Already in the United Kingdom, and I'm sure across the world, spontaneous community groups are emerging. People are helping one another. People are helping the vulnerable. And as Brad Evans said in the podcast I did with him, Under the Skin, yesterday, it shows how far we've fallen that surprises us. Hey, people are like starting groups to help people who can't get medicine and people that are trapped in flats. Wow! Human kindness. Like, have you seen some of those poems and things that are passed around, like a letter from COVID-19, as if the whole thing has been orchestrated to arrest us, to bring us into suspension, and all those things we thought were impossible, stopping air travel, stopping schools, staying inside, reflecting for a while, suddenly seem feasible. Now, I don't want to seem like I'm being glib or dismissive if you're in a position where you're suffering, if you're like, I'm scared about my job, I'm scared about my future, I'm scared about vulnerable members of my family. But in a sense, it is a revelatory fear as opposed to a newly ignited fear. What I mean to say is, weren't you already, like I was, slightly fearful that we were living in an unconscious way? That what's happened really is things that were submerged are now becoming present, that we're beginning to understand vulnerability, frailty, obligation, and that we're operating within systems that are somewhat unreal. So much of our time, work, labour is undertaken in order to service ideas that don't necessarily benefit us. To put this into clear economic terms, there's a libertarian philosopher whose name I've obviously forgotten. I'm not going to start accurately citing resources at a time like this, not in the middle of this gentle emergent apocalypse. He says, like, 30 to 40 to maybe even 50% of your working day, you are working for whoever takes your tax, presumably the state, the government. So for 3 hours of every working day, you don't work for whoever you think you work for. If you're self-employed or you work for the NHS, that's tax. That's going towards the government, because there's a contract between us and the government that they'll provide utilities and primarily safety and justice and all of these various ideas that have emerged over the progress of our kind. And in order to be umbrellaed by that contract, we need to contribute tax. But furthermore, there are other enormous entities that tax us similarly. I speculated yesterday, where does Amazon's enormous profit come from, or Facebook's enormous profit come from? Do they suck it from the intelligence of Zuckerberg and Bezos? No, of course not. This profit comes from us, from all of us. So for a further hour or two a day, we are working to sustain transnational corporations. Now, we've for a long while known that there are ecological consequences for it. It's damaging to the planet. Even if you are one of the people that's not down with climate change science for whatever reason and say, it's the rhythms of the earth, you would have to say surely that it's better not to be regarding the earth entirely as a resource, but as something we are in symbiotic relationship with. Similarly, the mental health crisis, the addiction crisis, all ruptures and eruptions and emanations of disconnection and discontentment. I'm a long way from saying the coronavirus is a positive thing. I'm, like you, scared of it, scared of what it means, scared of the unknown. But because of my own life, I have been forced to live by spiritual principles. Spiritual principles essentially mean love is important, kindness is important, compassion is important, I am not important, my ego is not important. You know, don't you, the Isaiah quote, and I'm not hitting you with raw Christianity here from the Abrahamic forefathers, but, fear not, for I have redeemed you. I have called you by your name, you are mine. When I saw that in a prison in Brixton where I was doing a poem, not doing time, I felt comforted. Fear not, because fear is what I felt. I felt relieved to not be in fear. Oh, tell me why I don't need to be afraid, because I am afraid. Fear not, for I have redeemed you. What does redeem mean? Forgive, salvation. Okay, so I'm redeemed. Fear not, for I have redeemed you. I've called you by your name. Your name, Russell, Stephen, Josh, whoever you are, you have been called by your name. Okay, this is good. So it's not just a generic thing. You are, but the final part of the verse, I've called you by your name, you are mine. Fear not, for I've redeemed you. I've called you by your name, you are mine. The reason we don't have to be afraid is we don't belong to ourselves anymore. We don't belong to our individual wants and desires. Where are people finding comfort? Service, taking care of one another, being newly aware, newly conscious, like again reminded of how much I love my parents and the older people in my life and the vulnerable people in my life and the people that have got sick kids in the world and the people that are experiencing this. It wasn't that always more important than how many likes I get or how much money I earn or whether my parting's in quite the right place, which still, even amidst the pandemic, can give me pause for thought, or should the parting be more in the centre? This reminds us of significance. Please, I remind you again, I ain't being glib about the consequences and the strain on the various global health services and the fear and suspicion we have of our leaders, and that sense that the oratory they display publicly is at somewhat at odds with the private closed room, panelled walls, leather seats, oak doors conversations that they may be having. Are they having different conversations there than the tub thumping militaristic oratory that we experience behind the podiums beset with flags? I sense that we are. Brad Evans, also in the Under the Skin podcast I'd done the other day, pointed out that the use of military language could be understood as a coded way of introducing literal militarization in the streets by saying, oh, we've got a war against coronavirus. It's not just galvanizing and, sort of sub-Churchillian rhetoric, or Trump with his the Chinese viruses will be banished from our shores. Again, it shows that there is almost, even with the literal chemical coronavirus, there is not just one coronavirus. There's what we project onto the coronavirus. There is the mobilization and utilization of the coronavirus. In one militarized, industrialized colonial power, it is a foreign enemy. In another, it's a resource for militarization. In Australia, for example, don't hoard toilet roll, but it's okay to hoard. It's not Australian. Stop it, which I kind of liked hearing when I heard it, because me coming from an ancient land like England, what do you mean not Australian? What is Australia? What are the essential qualities of Australia? Did some people live here even before we got here? So it's okay to, it's not cool to hoard toilet roll, but it is cool to hoard billions. Oh man, this is an interesting time of significant awakening, and like you, I don't know what the fuck's going on or what the fuck's going to happen. All I know is I've got mates that are hypochondriacs and they're loving this shit. Oh, finally, it's actually happening. This is a wet dream for you hypochondriacs, isn't it? Well, now you've got something to worry about. And what about the obsessive compulsive? I've got mates that are OCD, the washing the hands. I'm sort of enjoying the no contact a little bit. Like when because I never know whether to shake hands or fist bump or high five. Now it's nothing. It's just all right, mate. That at least. Let us reach for positives in this. Let us recognise that we don't know, but that we never knew. We did, on some level, intuit that things weren't going the right way. What were we worried about during Brexit? What were we worried about during Trump? And I know both of those things have political connotations and implications in this new environment, but what is being revealed to us, in my humble, at a time like this, humble opinion, is a deeper reality, and a deeper reality that's also present in us, that we're going to need individually and collectively to go beyond what we believe reality should be, accept what reality is, and see what new emergent realities could be created from the crucible of this chaos. The Buddhists say, don't they? Chaos. And we're like, oh shit, chaos. But how much do you want your old life back? How much do you want your old life back? And I'm not being dismissive about vulnerable relatives or economic impediments that you may currently be experiencing. I'm simply saying, how do you imagine the new world? How do you imagine the world that emerges after this one? Are you going to happily get back onto the trains? Are you going to happily go back to the call center? Am I going to happily go back to pumping out content primarily for money? What are we going to do? How are we going to review this? Because as you know, I've long believed in the possibility of revolution and change. As you know, I've assumed that revolution is coming, and we don't know what form of cataclysm is going to provide the serendipitous carpet upon which we will walk to a new world, and what it will feel like, and how for a while it may seem like crisis. So I suppose what we must do is what we can to be positive to one another. Try and keep our sense of humour, and remember, we don't know what's best or what will emerge from this. Let me know your comments and questions underneath so that we can remain in constant dialogue, because hey, social media, that's what we've got now instead of handshakes. Thank God.